Okay, good afternoon or good evening, everybody. Welcome to this session on the part of the engagement that we're running for the West Yorkshire Connectivity Strategy. This session is all about active travel and its role in a strong, sustainable and inclusive economy. And we've got about an hour and a half this evening, and we've got a lot of interesting speakers and panel to have a discussion and to answer your questions. My name is Ben Steele. I'm going to be facilitating this evening. Walking and cycling is one of the most challenging topics that I think we're dealing with in this engagement as part of the West Yorkshire connectivity work. It's perhaps the mode that's got the most to offer in terms of local connections, benefiting people, improvements to health, well-being, and its links to other agendas. But it's also the mode, particularly cycling, that's got a very small mode share. It's almost as if we need to affect a kind of radical culture change to encourage more take-up of active travel modes, and is often subject to local opposition if the schemes are not found to be exactly right, as we've seen with some of the emergency measures put in over the last year around the country. So active travel, fantastic opportunity, but also some challenges. And we're going to hear some really interesting speakers. I'd ask you to use the Q&A, the question and answer function, to put your questions in. We'll attempt to answer these during the course of the session and then pick them up in Q&A when the presentations are finished. But everything you ask will be really useful to us in terms of the overall impact inputs into our engagement on all the parts of the connectivity plan. So so please do feel free to put your questions in. I'm going to ask Sam to move the slide on, please, just to introduce our speakers and panelists this evening. So as I said, my name is Ben Steele. I'm Managing Director of West Yorkshire Combined Authority. Councillor Groves, would you like to introduce yourself, please?
Hello, I'm Councillor Kim Groves and I'm Chair of West Yorkshire Combined Authority Transport Committee.
Thank you. Kit?
Hello, I'm Kit Allwinter and I'm the Active Travel Policy Officer at the West Yorkshire Combined Authority.
Thank you. Katie?
Hi, I'm Katie Evanson. So I'm the Comms Engagement Lead for City Connect and our Transforming Cities Fund programme.
Thank you, Katie. And I'm delighted this evening that we're joined by three experts in this area. Can I start with Jenny? Would you like to introduce yourself?
Hi everyone, I'm Jenny Wiles. I'm the Regional Director covering the North of England at Living Streets.
Thanks, Jenny. Catriona?
Hi everyone, my name is Katrina Swanson. I'm an associate at Phil Jones Associates, which is a consultancy that specialises in active travel.
Thank you. Mumtaz?
Hi, my name's Mumtaz. I run On a Bike, which is a community cycling club based in Bradford.
Fantastic. Thank you all. And we're going to hear from you during the course of the presentations this evening. Sam? So we're going to some introductions and some context now. We're going to start with Kit and with Katie talking about walking and cycling in West Yorkshire. Our three experts will then give presentations from their perspectives. Councillor Groves will then draw some conclusions and reflect on how this relates to the broader connectivity plan. And then that should leave us a good half an hour or so for discussion and questions and answers. We'll keep saying throughout, the purpose of this is to get your views, those of you that are listening in. So really keen to hear your views, your questions, and we'll feed all of this into the engagement process that we're running. Sam? Thank you. Just by way of context, as I've said a couple of times, this is part of a broader set of consultations to develop a connectivity infrastructure plan for the whole of West Yorkshire. The first time that we've tried to develop something that truly tries to join up across the different modes of transport to form a coherent whole, and is lodged very much in transport's role to serve other purposes, be those health, employment, community, etc. So seeing transport in its role to support other forms of urban and rural living. We've been running a series of these sessions to reflect the different documents that we are engaging on. We had a session on rail yesterday. We're looking to talk about buses. We've talked already last week about mass transit, and we're also had a session on mobility strategy. It's all backed up with a series of reports that provide evidence and cases for change, all of which is on our website. But this evening, we're talking about local walking and cycling infrastructure plans, the importance of active travel, and the role that it can play. Thanks, Sam. I'm not going to say too much about this slide because I think others are going to cover the detail, but I think what we're trying to do here is set out a vision. We're at the beginning of a process, in the sense of how we best encourage and provide the right infrastructure, behavioural change measures, and other policy-driven elements that are there to encourage safe walking and cycling across the whole of West Yorkshire and across all communities. So this is all about starting engaging early and then coming up with an ambitious vision. Sam? I think the things on this slide are fairly self-explanatory. You'll be well aware of the challenges that we face. The graph on this slide is talking about the imperatives we have around reducing carbon emissions in West Yorkshire, and the target that the Combined Authority has set across the whole of West Yorkshire is 2038 to achieve net zero carbon. And quite a lot of this work is about what's our pathway to get to that place. Sam? Okay, so now I'm going to pass to Kit and then to Katie to talk about the how and why of the infrastructure. Kit, over to you.
Remember to unmute myself, step number 1 of online Zoom calls. Sorry, everyone. So thanks very much, Ben, for that. And I'd like to talk to you very briefly about why we're putting walking and cycling at the centre of our infrastructure, of our connectivity infrastructure plan, and also how we're going to go about doing that. And I'm going to talk about the first half of that how, and then Katie's going to come in and talk about the second half, and perhaps the more important one. So the question about why we're doing this, if you could move on to the next slide, please, Sam, is quite an interesting one. It involves every journey, be it going to the bus, going to the railway station, going to the shop, can be walked or cycled. And especially when we're looking at moving out of car trips and instead into more sustainable journeys, be they by public transport or by active travel, we really need to make sure that walking and cycling, therefore, is at the centre of this. Now, I could talk to you about air quality or the environmental and decarbonisation benefits, or even indeed the physical benefits and the mental health benefits of walking and cycling more, but I think that these are A, well covered, and B, better covered by people who are more talented than I at explaining these things. And I only have 7 minutes to talk about the two that I've isolated here on the screen. So you'll see that I've picked up physical space and particularly looking around how it affects our communities. So what I want to think about here is that when we put walking and cycling at the center of our system, rather than cars necessarily, what we actually see is a complete system change, and it's so much more than just carbon benefits. We can fit 10 bikes parked in the space of a single parked car. A bike lane can move 14,000 people an hour compared to only 2,000 people an hour in a car lane. If you think about that, think how much more space our villages, our towns and our cities could have in them. Space for trees, nature, cafes, sustainable urban drainage, restaurants and bars to spill out in, economic and communal and environmental life, rather than just the storage and movement of metal boxes. I mean, being more space efficient also creates significant benefits for councils such as ourselves. In looking at places where there is increased active travel, in less car dependent areas, maintenance costs, if you analyze them, are 33% lower than in car orientated places, because sprawl is quite expensive to maintain. And looking not just at physical space, but at mental space, it's really interesting, if you ever go to the Netherlands, to listen to the traffic, or rather to listen to the absence of it. You can hear birds and people talking across the street. Do you remember at the start of lockdown when we all sort of suddenly realized that the roar of motorway traffic that we often hear in the background actually isn't a feature of modern life, but can be taken away if we make different choices? And that has all sorts of different benefits, not just in terms of reduced cars on the street, but in reducing the noise. We look at things like, that's going to see improved health, because noise pollution from traffic is linked to stress, heart disease, stroke, obesity, diabetes, and poor cognitive function as a result of that stress. So suddenly, rather than having our schools on main roads, we're going to have schools on quiet places. We can actually have better performing children, which is always, a good thing, I think. What I particularly want to look at, though, is not just sort of that physical space element, but the inequity and the impacts on our community that moving from a car-based system to a more active-based system would offer us. If you look at the statistics in the latest sort of round of not the census, but the National Travel Survey and things, 20% of men and 30% of women don't have a driving license. 1/3 of households in the lowest income decile have access to a car or a van, and only half of single parent families with children have access to a vehicle. Making life easier for people without cars actually makes life easier, not just for them, but for all of us. And I want to think about that in terms of time. If you think how much time is spent by parents ferrying their children from school to a friend's house, to piano lessons, to tennis lessons, to the mosque, to church, to whatever it is that they're doing. So much time. If the children can get about safely and independently, then suddenly that time, the parent, you're no longer relying on the taxi service of mum and dad. Suddenly you've got this situation where the parents have got time to do what they want to do. They don't need to be sort of driving their offspring around. Suddenly they can have a hobby of themselves. They can play a part in their community. They can go over and meet their neighbors. They can go to the pub, do whatever they want to do. And indeed, more broadly than that, if we go back to those busy roads that make people unable to cycle or walk on them because they're currently unsafe, that's terrible for children's mobility. It's also terrible for the mobility of other people. The elderly or those who have reduced mobility find roads especially hostile, especially when they have to use signalized crossings to get across them, or where they require dropped curbs to get across because of the traffic flow. With less private motor traffic, we can encourage more connections across streets, between neighbours and around areas, and enable more trips, which I think is a real strength and a real boon for our economy and for our society. Next slide, please, Sam. So how about are we going to do this? Well, it's really important that in designing this, as I said, we make sure it's suitable for everyone, from children to the elderly, parents, disabled, people of all abilities and confidence levels on bikes and on foot. The common phrase is 8 to 80 as a sort of overarching idea for who we want on this. Now, the government in the summer published Local Transport Note 120, which laid down 5 network principles, which are pretty inoffensive and generally good. Coherent, direct, safe, comfortable, and attractive. If we can make our walking and our cycling networks those things, we will make people, or we will enable people to use those facilities because they will be attractive and useful. We at the West Yorkshire want to add in integrated, not just integrated into our urban fabric and our urban space or our rural space, but also integrated into our transport infrastructure. You remember at the start, I said that every journey, be it walking to the bus stop or biking to the railway station, might involve active travel. We need to make sure that when you get there, it's easy to lock your bike or to get on from the pavement into the station rather than anything else. So to give some examples of what this might look like, we need to make sure that we're designing our infrastructure, and let's look at walking infrastructure here, for people in wheelchairs, people pushing prams and buggies, or people dragging the shopping trolleys with them, little tartan ones with the zip-up covers. I mean, actually, why not? No, all shopping trolleys, people pushing the one they nicked from Spar, that one too. They should be able to use that and cross the road with that. What we need to make sure, therefore, is that there's no barriers, no gates, and that people feel safe using that. We need to make sure it's easy for people to cross the road and that they have plenty of time to do it. Living Streets, as I'm sure Jenny's going to talk about later, have run campaigns on this and the importance of making sure that people have plenty of time and don't feel rushed and don't feel stressed when they have to cross the road. And in terms of cycling, what it means is making sure we design for all cycle types, be it recumbents, be it cargo bikes, be it hand trikes attached to wheelchairs, so that everyone is able to get about safely and comfortably. If we build it, they will come. But on top of that, it's so much more than just providing infrastructure. And Katie is now going to talk about that. Katie?
Hi, thanks, Kit. It certainly is. So what I'm going to cover today is the role of behaviour change as part of supporting more people to make more journeys on foot and by bike. The role it has within the connectivity plan, as Kit has already said, it's not just about building infrastructure, but building in our complementary and supportive measures that enable people to use it. Our approach on behaviour change, how this has developed and how it will evolve. Insight we've undertaken already and plan to undertake, understanding the barriers and motivations to enable people to make that change, how this influences our approach to developing a behaviour change programme, the evaluation and lessons learned from programmes we've delivered already, and how we will build this into future delivery. Next slide, please. So why it is more than build it and they will come. We're working from a low baseline, particularly around cycling. We know this and we plan to address it, but we do plan to address it for both modes. The connectivity plan outlines that we want to grow walking and cycling to shape our places to enable this growth. The evidence below gives an indication of the scale of the challenge and change required to get to net zero carbon by 2038. The West Yorkshire Transport Strategy, adopted in August 2017, sets out a medium-term target to increase cycling by 300% and walking by 10% by 2027, targets that are already ambitious, but evidence suggests we need to be more ambitious. So to do this, we need to deliver infrastructure programmes that build in more than just tarmac and curbs, but the skills and ability to use new routes. Enabling this change should be based on the 3 E's, so changing our environment, engaging with our communities, and encouraging people to use it. So with the environment, it's the built environment, but this is wider than the streetscape. So it's environment at work, for example, so quality facilities at businesses, secure bike parking. And it's not just about the route to get there. In engagement, it's from working with people who live in the areas where you're delivering change through co-design. So for example, on our Streets for People's projects, the communities are heavily engaged at the design stage of the project delivery, and then to engaging with communities as infrastructure is delivered and then completed. And with encouragement, it's more than just making people aware that these things have happened, but providing them with the tools to enable that change, and enables probably the better word that we should be using. So what this means is delivering a high quality walking and cycling network that is supported by a comprehensive long-term programme of complementary measures that target the wider barriers to travelling by bike or on foot. Next slide, please. So we know there is suppressed demand. Market research undertaken by the Combined Authority focused on cycling shows that people in general think it's a good idea, whether they will consider it or not. So they don't have to be wanting to do it to know that and agree that cycling has a positive impact on the local environment, on air quality, and makes a positive contribution to the quality of life in West Yorkshire. Of these people that were asked, a quarter are already cycling and a quarter will consider it. So we also know there's scope for growth. We've commissioned a similar survey to understand more about those who consider walking for everyday journeys, but work that has been done during COVID is showing that people expect to walk more than before the COVID pandemic. So research released today, for example, from King's College London is showing that 40% of 2,200 people who were surveyed expect to walk more than before, and this is for journeys like shopping locally. We know that walking is already a major form of transport and is an area for growth and where behavioural change can happen, and we need to do more to enable this. Next slide, please. To do this, complementary measures are needed to overcome the wider barriers to active travel. So for example, with cycling, the biggest barrier is not feeling safe while cycling and not wanting to ride on the roads. The main way to address this is through infrastructure. So it's providing people with safe routes, and it's also reducing traffic on the road network. But there are other barriers that we need to consider and then address. So some of the main barriers that we're told our research shows are the biggest barriers for people is the ability or confidence to ride a bike, access to a bike in the first place, and then the ability to maintain it and the cost of this as well. For other areas of travel, to commute or for work-based travel, for example, it's about better facilities and secure storage. For walking, sometimes it's just permission when at work to walk for work, and it's been allowed to make the journey to a meeting on foot, not by car. So it's a policy influence as well. And then we also need to factor in the motivating factors. So why people ride and walk. When we ask that question, the biggest factors that come back are for health and because they enjoy it. So there are other areas, there are other reasons like cost, the environment and other factors that people consider, but essentially it's about your health, how you feel, and also because it's the activity itself. People want to enjoy it, and it's our job to make sure it's as enjoyable as possible. Next slide, please. So to enable people to walk and cycle more often, we need activity that addresses the barriers and supports the motivations to enable people to do it. We need targeted activity to support these measures at schools, businesses, and within and across the community to target those everyday journeys. It's not just about travel for work. We need activity that is coordinated in partnership across local authorities, partner organisations, including direct deliveries and community groups. We need activity that is sustained, long-term and funded, and we need activity that is delivered alongside a growing high-quality walking and cycling network and built in when we are delivering new infrastructure. Next slide, please. So we're learning and building on the work that we've been delivering as a combined authority and our partners across West Yorkshire and York and through other programmes. This is an example of our dedicated walking and cycling programme, City Connect, which has been our flagship programme since 2014, and where the combined authority first started to deliver behaviour change alongside infrastructure to enable more people to walk and cycle. We're starting to see the benefits from this, and through our evaluation, we're learning the lessons on this. So for this slide shows that our investment has not just improved and built kilometres of routes and also seen increases in usage and journeys on foot and by bike, but there's the wider benefits that we've seen from behaviour change. So 1,800 people have received free adult cycle training. 60% of those people now cycle once a week. Next slide, please. So we started. We're already working in this area, and it's really important to know, and there are many people across many organisations who are delivering a broad range of activity with lots of success. Working in schools, with businesses and employers, delivering training and working in communities across West Yorkshire to enable that growth. Final slide. But we need to do more, and we know this. And the connectivity plan sets out this ambition and the approach we plan to take across the region to realise it. Thank you.
Thanks, Katie. I'd now like to hand over to Jenny Wiles, who's going to talk a bit more about walking from a Living Streets perspective. Thanks, Jenny.
Thanks. Hi, everyone. I've already introduced myself, but just for the benefit of the latecomers. So I'm Jenny Wiles. I'm Regional Director for the North of England at Living Streets. We're the UK charity for everyday walking. So we're very much not about climbing mountains or walking vast journeys. We're about those everyday journeys that people make to school, to the shops, to work. And I think especially over the last year that a lot of us have been making just for our physical and mental health and just to get out of the house. So that's kind of where we're coming from. And I'm going to pick up on some of the themes that Kit and Katie have already introduced. I'm really pleased that they had lots of stats in their presentations because I don't have very many. So it will hopefully complement quite nicely. Next slide, please. Okay, so if you're not already familiar with Living Streets, we've been around quite a long time. We were originally established back in 1929, so we're not that far off our 100th birthday now. Originally we were the Pedestrians Association, and we were set up as the car became more and more ubiquitous, and particularly around concerns for pedestrian safety. But even at that time, there was a really strong kind of focus on people who are walking, having a voice, and trying to fight for that voice and make that voice heard. And we still campaign in that way to this day. We have a network of members, local groups and supporters alongside our volunteer trustees. And we also have quite a lot of staff like myself who work with partners like West Yorkshire Combined Authority and partners all around the country to deliver projects to support a lot of this work as well. So just to touch on some of the kind of campaigning work that we have done. So initially in the early days, we were campaigning for things like a 30-mile-an-hour speed limit and to have seatbelts in cars, introduce zebra crossings. And nowadays we're still along a similar theme, but now we're campaigning for 20-mile-an-hour limits. We're making sure that people have time to cross at crossings, and also making sure that those crossings are prioritised for people on foot, amongst lots of other things. Next slide, please. So back in September, we launched our new 5-year strategy, perhaps a slightly tricky time to launch a strategy at that point. But I think it still is holding out so far, and we've still got a lot of work to do on this. So just to pick out the 3 main outcomes that we introduce in that strategy. The first is choose walking. So this is about making sure that walking is top of the list when it comes to transport. I'm really pleased that I was the first guest presenter today, because yeah, often it's the afterthought after all of the other modes of transport, but we really need to make sure it's prioritised, both with decision makers, politicians, and ultimately with everyone who are making those decisions every day about how they're going to travel. Alongside that, we want to see better streets, and this is kind of where it links in with the plan. So we're working on developing design standards. We're growing our technical team in-house, but also working closely with partners to make sure that those standards for walking are really clear. I think often the difficulty with dealing with walking as a mode of transport, firstly, is making sure it's recognised as that, and secondly is then having that understanding of why there are things that need to be improved for walking, particularly with regards to the infrastructure, but also more widely. I think we kind of accept, okay, we've got cracked pavements and we've not got drop curbs and crossings where we need them, and it's been so long that that's been the case, we've kind of forgotten or not realised that actually things could be better. And so as a charity, we seek to give people the tools and the understanding to be able to advocate better for walking. And that brings me neatly on to the last of the 3 outcomes, which is around having engaging with all walks of life. So listening to and championing the huge range of different people with different lived experiences that are our members, our supporters, and the wider world, and making sure that streets are accessible and inclusive for everyone, and that walking is something everyone can engage with. Next slide, please. So just to give you a flavour of the type of work that we're doing, and again, this reflects on quite a lot of what Kit and Katie have already introduced. Some of the key things that we want to see for walking is having a really good walking network, having the space, and not just the space, but making sure that that network is really safe and attractive. And as it's come up in the chat already, it's not just about getting from A to B, but walking also encompasses all of those aspects of a place that encourage people to stop, to socialise. You know, so important, again, especially at the moment, we might actually be able to socialise outdoors soon. And do we have places that are equipped to enable us to do that? Safety too, and I'll touch on priority as well. We had 2 big government consultations last year around the highway code and around the introduction of a ban for pavement parking across England, and our supporters fed into both of those, and hopefully we'll see the outcome of those quite soon. Speeds I've talked about already. Health, again, has really come into sharp focus over the last year. We've got a particular target around primary schools and getting more children walking to school, but really, you know, health is so important for all of us, and the role that walking can play in that has really come to the fore in the last year. And then finally, I'll revisit this a little bit later on, but we have our network of Living Streets local groups, and so we're keen to support the growth and activity of those. Next slide, please. So it's really pleasing to see in the connectivity infrastructure plan that the top on the list of the priorities is walking and cycling becoming major forms of transport. We know they are already. Actually, walking, I think, comes out as the second most common form of transport after the car, but are they treated and funded and supported in that way as that priority? And that's for short journeys, but also crucially, as Kit mentioned, it's about that part of longer journeys. If people want to be able to easily use the train, use the bus, can they actually find their way to the bus stop? Can they access the train station? Do they feel safe to do that of an evening? Again, you know, this is a real concern, particularly at the moment. Do they know even where their nearest bus stop is and what buses go to it? So it's about having that knowledge, but also the infrastructure that's going to make people think twice about jumping in the car. Next slide, please. So picking up on Katie's presentation about behaviour change, Living Streets has worked really closely with West Yorkshire and the local authorities on a range of behaviour change projects over the years, with schools, with communities, with workplaces, and you know, I think we've seen some amazing outcomes from some of these projects, but part of the challenge with that type of work is that it's historically been short-term funded. You know, we've had often one-year programmes of funding from DFT, and that makes it really difficult to really embed that activity and that behaviour change to really get the best outcomes from it. So hopefully we will see a shift in that with this commitment at the West Yorkshire level, and have the long-term plans and the long-term funding to enable this type of work to really grow. Next slide, please. Just to touch on a key element of that, which features in a lot of our behaviour change work, but also supports infrastructure. We do a lot of audit work with communities and with schools, and I guess this list, these are kind of the main themes that we look at when we undertake an audit with local people, and it really just shows the breadth of things that come into play when we're thinking about walking. It's not just about the footpath. There's so much more to it than that. And it's also about how you feel in a place. And that's quite difficult to pin down until you actually talk to local people and they tell you about it. Next slide, please. So just to pick up on a few tools that we have that might be useful for you in responding to this and other consultations and work around walking and active travel. The Pedestrian Pound, we updated this report in 2018, and it has a wealth of evidence and information from around the world about helping to make the economic case for walking. It's not all about money, but sometimes it can help in the right conversation to have some of that to hand. Next slide. Thank you very much. And just wanted to touch quickly on school streets. I know particularly in Leeds, there's been a rollout of school streets and some other of the other authorities as well. And again, we have a range of support and advice. But if you do go onto our website, you'll see that the wide range of resources and information that you can tap into. Next slide, please. So I just want to finish off by telling you a little bit about the local groups that we already have in West Yorkshire, and then a little bit of a rallying call, I guess, to see if there might be scope to grow those groups and maybe even set up some more. So this is our poster boy for our Moortown local group. This is Dom, who actually works for us now, but he started off his Living Streets journey as a campaigner, setting up the Moortown local group with a group of parents. So it's really focused around that journey to school and improving the safety and the accessibility of those routes. Next slide, please. So as well as our Moortown group, we also have a really active Leeds local group. And not that long ago, we had a Shipley and Saltaire group set up. And I believe there is also talk of a Bradford group underway at the moment. But yeah, still quite a lot of areas across West Yorkshire where we don't have active groups. And so I would encourage you to pop onto the website, find a bit more. And if you are interested, to drop us a line. So yeah, that's pretty much me for now. I know we've got a Q&A coming up later, and yeah, really keen to support you all to make sure that walking has that really loud voice, and to give you the tools that you need to contribute to the conversation. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much, Jenny. That was really clear and really helpful and insightful presentation. Just before we hand over to Katrina, I just wondered if can people please use the Q&A rather than the chat, because that enables us to answer the responses. So please use that. And so without further ado, can I hand over to Katrina from Phil Jones Associates to talk about delivery.
Great, thanks, Ben. Yeah, hi everyone, good evening. So yeah, I'm Katrina. I work for Phil Jones Associates as an associate. And Phil Jones Associates are probably well known to quite a lot of you already, because we're quite well known in the active travel world as the authors of the local cycling and walking infrastructure plan guidance, LCWIPs, and also the new DFT cycling infrastructure design guidance, known as LTM 120. And as you've heard from the previous speakers, walking and cycling are at the heart of West Yorkshire's new connectivity plan, and that prioritises the development of new phase 2 LCWIP. And PGA, working with Mott MacDonald, are actually supporting the combined authority to produce that phase 2 LCWIP. But the reason that I've been asked to speak tonight is that I previously led on walking and cycling for Salford City Council in Greater Manchester. So I'm going to talk a bit about my experiences of delivering high quality and ambitious schemes there. So I'm going to talk through a few of those examples and touching on some of the key lessons learned, which hopefully will be of interest for you going forward as you move into delivering more high quality schemes across West Yorkshire. Next slide, please, Sam. So yeah, one of the key things I want to talk about, and which I'll touch on in all of my examples, is the importance of having a plan. So those of you who have read LTM 120 might recognise this plan because it's in the network planning chapter, and it's actually from the Salford network plan that I commissioned PGA to produce for Salford way back in 2016, I think it was. And at the time, the LCWIP guidance was just being finalised, and I'd heard of it and saw the value of that approach of having this evidence-based network plan. So I commissioned it and got that in place to kind of underpin kind of funding bids and inform future schemes. Before that, we kind of prioritised routes based on kind of the office's kind of gut instinct and ideas from the Salford Cycle Forum, which at that point was about 3 people, and also kind of reacted to opportunities that came along. It wasn't very strategic, and it wasn't really the best way to build a walking and cycling network. And in terms of Salford's network, the timing turned out to be really, really good, because about a month after the plan was finished, Chris Boardman was appointed as Cycling and Walking Commissioner for Salford, which massively increased the political will and then the funding for schemes, and we're able to start delivering it really quickly. Next slide, please, Sam. Thanks. So moving on to talk about some of the examples. a key part of Salford's cycle network is actually traffic-free routes. So historically, Salford was quite a big mining area, so it's left this legacy of disused kind of railway routes and things like that, which Salford are gradually kind of upgrading into walking and cycling routes. And I know that sometimes people can be a bit dismissive of traffic-free routes and think they're not really very good cycling infrastructure, but actually in Salford, they form the backbone of the network in the west of the city, and they're really useful routes kind of connecting key towns, and kind of unbundling cycling from the kind of road network. So often they pass kind of at a different grade to road, so you don't have to worry about junctions, and they're actually a really kind of safe and attractive way of delivering cycling infrastructure. But what I would say is it's important not just to deliver traffic-free infrastructure just because it's the easy option, and that's where the plan comes in. So it can identify where you really have that demand and where these routes will be useful. And actually, they're not necessarily the easy choice. If you're going to do it properly and have them wide enough and surfaced and lit, and with no barriers on them, they're not necessarily easy to do politically, and they do need to be funded properly. So it's important that you do prioritise the ones that will be of most use. And the great thing about kind of building traffic-free routes like this is you have loads of opportunities to bring in wider benefits. So improving access for people to green space, but also opportunities to incorporate kind of swales and hedge planting and tree planting so that you can improve biodiversity through the scheme as well. Next slide, please, Sam. So my next example is very different to the traffic-free routes, but again shows the importance of having the network plan in place. So this is in central Salford, so very, very urban area. And the network plan that PGA produced for Salford kind of showed that this road in central Salford was a really important part of the network. So this is Oldfield Road. And it's an area where there was a lot of regeneration and development happening. So once we had that plan, we kind of realised that this needed to be a priority for us to work out what we wanted to do on this corridor so that it could inform development as it came along, rather than us having to kind of think and kind of shoehorn things in. So we developed a concept plan for the whole corridor. And then the scheme that you can see in the kind of bottom right-hand picture kind of came along, a kind of scheme of townhouses. And we were able to go to the developer and say, well, hey, as you need to do the public realm outside this development, please can you develop build the first phase of this scheme. Here's the design. So that was really good. We were able to kind of contribute to the developer, and they actually built the scheme as part of that. And this was the first kind of really ambitious kind of protected cycle track that we built in Salford. So it kind of played into our hands that it was quite a short section, because we were able to kind of really focus on the details and get those right, and also use it as a kind of pilot and showcase to show people what the new breed of cycling infrastructure could be like. And as you can see from the picture on the left-hand side, it's about much more than just cycling infrastructure. It's really a kind of place-making scheme with really high kind of public realm, so high quality paving and rain gardens built into that. And the funding has now been secured for the rest of that corridor, and that's going through the detailed design process at the moment and should be delivered soon. Next slide, please, Sam. Yeah, so this one is slightly different again. So for those who don't know Salford, this is Trafford Road, which is a really kind of big, horrible road that serves kind of Salford Quays and Media City. And it also kind of severs that area from a neighbourhood called Odsal, that's on the other side of Trafford Road, which is one of the most deprived neighbourhoods in Salford, certainly probably in the country. Like Salford Central, the Quays and this Trafford Road area are experiencing huge growth at the moment. So there's a lot of kind of apartment blocks and things like that being built. So in line with the thinking of the time, around 2016, Salford City Council secured funding to increase traffic even further on this road to support all that new development. It didn't entirely ignore walking and cycling, so there was consideration given to kind of improving crossings on Trafford Road, but no thought was really given to Trafford Road as a route for cycling. So it wasn't really catered for. It was going to be kind of maybe shared use paths if you were lucky. But again, the network plan demonstrated that it was a really important cycle route. So that gave me the ammunition to kind of push for doing more. And then a couple of things happened that really helped. So Chris Boardman was appointed as Cycling and Walking Commissioner, which meant that ambitions kind of raised up. And then also TFGM developed this new design for junctions. So before that, we didn't really know what to do at junctions. A lot of schemes kind of gave up, so the link would be quite good, and then you'd get to a junction, it might just be a toucan crossing where pedestrians and cyclists had to share. But yeah, TFGM's kind of traffic engineers came up with this Cyclops junction, as it's called, so cycle optimized protected junction, which separates people walking and cycling and gives them protected infrastructure right around a junction. And the really good thing about this junction design is you can do it without it impacting on traffic capacity. So Salford were actually able to secure extra funding to do the scheme that they originally wanted to do, but also include cycling infrastructure. So they still get the traffic capacity benefits that they wanted, but also have these protected cycle tracks along the route, and then these really good crossings at each of the junctions as well. And this is helping to develop a really genuine network in central Salford. So this scheme on Trafford Road links to another scheme, which then links to the Oldfield Road scheme that I showed you before, and then on into the city centre as well. And there's also the area that I mentioned, Odsal, which is severed from Salford Quays by Trafford Road, is also being prioritised for a low traffic neighbourhood, which Salford are developing at the moment as well. Next slide, please, Sam. So yeah, that neatly brings me on to low traffic neighbourhoods. So I worked on a few of these when I was at Salford, including the one in Odsal that I just mentioned. For anyone not familiar with low traffic neighbourhoods, this is where you use kind of planters or bollards to prevent kind of through traffic and rat running on residential streets, which creates much kind of safer and more attractive conditions for walking and cycling, but also a lot of wider benefits, such as kind of less air and noise pollution, and safe space for kids to play out and things like that. So while I can't say we were particularly scientific about where we were doing it in Salford, we did generally focus on areas where we thought it would be most beneficial to do that. So areas that were experiencing a lot of rat running, but also where it was quite deprived and where car ownership was quite low. But my colleagues at PGA have actually done some really excellent work to develop a really good methodology for prioritising areas for LTNs, and it follows a similar kind of evidence-based approach as the LC WIPs, meaning that you can kind of prioritise them based on kind of criteria like deprivation and car ownership. So that's really useful when you're bidding to secure funding for these things, but also when you're talking to residents about why you've prioritised their area for this. So some of our learning at PGA from schemes that we've been involved in, plus other LTNs recently delivered over the last kind of 12 months, is that the placemaking side is really important. So a lot of people in their rush to roll these out kind of put the planters and the bollards in, but it's really those kind of pocket parks and seats and things which help kind of sell it to residents, particularly since, you know, they're losing out on something through these, you know, they're having to drive further. So it's nice to give something back and sell it to them in that way. And we've also learnt particularly with the ones that were kind of rushed out last summer, that really early genuine engagement with residents is really, really important, both to kind of get ownership and buy into the scheme, but also to really understand the issues that they want addressing through it, which might not all be traffic management issues. They might be things like personal safety and antisocial behaviour and things like that. And then following that early engagement, I definitely recommend that these things are trialled and that you tweak them as needed, and that resources are put in place to monitor them so that issues can be quickly resolved, and also that maintenance budgets are put in to keep them working as planned and looking as planned. Next slide, please. Yep, so that's it. So that's my whistle-stop tour of things that we delivered in Salford. So I hope you found that useful.
Katrina, that was brilliant. Thank you very much. And I think you have been talking about some things that have been hot topics in the Q&A. So I'm sure we'll come back to those a bit later on. Thank you for that. Can I turn to Mumtaz Khan from On a Bike, which is a community bike club working in Bradford, and I think Mumtaz wants to talk a little bit about how the work that she's been doing in that context. Over to you, Mumtaz.
Yeah, hi, thank you. I run On a Bike, obviously, which is a community cycling club, but also run On a Jiu-Jitsu club, which is the martial arts club. If you just go on to the next slide, please, Sam. So this is what I normally do pre-COVID, is throw people around for a living, punching, kicking, grappling, that kind of thing. But cycling is something that we've always developed as well, and it's kind of been more of a sideline. But with the pandemic, obviously we've had to do a shift in our focus, and what we've actually done is started to develop the cycling. So I'm going to show you just a quick kind of overview of how I've got into cycling to help explain, and then also the impact on the community. Next slide, please. If you just click through and then stop when it says On a Bike on the tree for me, please. So I started to ride a bike when I was around about, I think, 8-9 years old. Our family didn't have much money, and we had a bike in the cellar, which my dad said if I learnt to ride on it, I think one of the wheels was about square shaped and the other one looked triangular. And he was like, if you learn to ride a bike on that bike, I'll buy you a new one. And, you know, I was really determined, learn to ride a bike. And I remember showing it to my dad, and he was both happy and disappointed. Happy I could ride, but disappointed because it meant he had to go and buy me a new bike, which is a Flying Pigeon made in China. But I absolutely loved it, and cycling up and down my street, because that's where I was allowed to cycle. When I was in my mid-20s, I picked up cycling again. And it was probably only a matter of weeks, you know, when the weather was nice, and then put my bike away and then didn't touch it at all. When the Tour de France came through and the Grand Depart was in Yorkshire, then I was like, oh, you know, I used to like cycling when I was a kid. Obviously kind of touched upon it in my mid-20s, and then it was like, I'd like to get back into it again. And thankfully around then there was free cycling sessions for adults, and I signed myself up for it. So I could ride a bike, but I was not confident about going on the roads. And I had a really good instructor called Anna Green, who took me through the cycling sessions. And then once I actually learned that, bearing in mind I was already a coach, but in other sports and other disciplines, I was asking friends, you know, if they'd come and cycle with me, and touching on kind of, you know, Katie's presentation in terms of barriers, but also Paul Roberts' question in terms of how do we get people riding. You know, the barriers that came to me, or the feedback, this is from people I know, were either they couldn't ride a bike, or they could ride a bike and they'd forgotten, or they just did not have access to a bike. And as a club, we didn't have any either. So other than kind of giving them my bike to hop on, I couldn't actually ride with anyone. And an opportunity came up. So it was probably some kind of underspend, because there was an offer to do the cycling instructor training. And normally it's about £600, and it was £50. And I was like, right, I'll sign myself up for it, and went on the course and actually got trained up and developed then On a Bike, which was kind of a branch from our On a Jiu-Jitsu club. Going on to the next slide. In terms of actually sourcing bikes, I remember, I think it was Greg Woodward, who's the coach and instructor on the cycling instructors course. And I said to him, I said, you know, how do community cycling clubs go about getting a fleet of bikes? And he's like, people don't have fleet of bikes. You know, and I was thinking, well, actually we need a fleet of bikes, or have bikes in place, because how are people going to access it? And especially if they don't ride normally, or they haven't learned to ride, then you need some, you know, decent bikes that they're actually happy to go on. And thankfully, I came across Well North Enterprises, and we did a project. So somebody called Carl Milner, basically, we had a meeting, and he commented that somebody had said that Asian women don't ride bikes. And I was like, what are you talking about? I ride a bike, and I have friends that ride bikes. And within 4 weeks of having that conversation, we turned this project around where the Tour de Yorkshire was actually happening in Bradford in 2017. And we got 200 people cycling on their bikes. A lot of them were novice riders. Some of them hadn't actually ridden a bike, and we taught them to ride, especially for this event. And they cycled from Lister Park to Roberts Park, which was only 2.5 miles, and then 2.5 miles back. So it's 5 miles, but to them, it felt like they'd just done, you know, like Land's End to John O'Groats. It was a massive challenge, but a fantastic day. But the benefit from that particular ride was that we actually ended up with a fleet of bikes as a legacy. Okay, moving on, please. So during the pandemic, next slide, please. What we did was, with that shift, it started with funding from Cycling UK, who funded a series of Dr. Bike sessions. We started one in Girlington, which is in Bradford 8, and set up the store, which you can see in the background there. And as people were walking around, they're like, "Oh, are you selling bikes?" And it's like, "Nope, not selling them. We're just fixing them." And like, "How much for?" And it's like, "No, it's free. It's part of a service." And within half an hour, we were packed. It was full. And then we ended up doing 4 every single weekend, and they were all full. So, the demand was there. People had bikes that they just weren't using because of the issues of not knowing how to maintain them and not having the funds to be able to maintain them. While we were doing the Dr. Bikes, if we just go on to the next slide, please. Although the remit of the cycling, you can do things like replace inner tubes, you can replace brake cables, etc. A gentleman came to Dr. Bike and he needed a free wheel on his back wheel. And I was like, "Look, we don't do that in our service." And he's like, "Can you get a free wheel?" And he was like, "Look, I can't afford one." And I was like, "I know somebody who has, various supplies. I'll go and visit him and see if I can actually pick you one up." So I went down to meet Adrian. This is Alison in the picture. Adrian wasn't available at the time. I didn't want his picture taken, I should say. So I went down to OnTrack to pick up a wheel. And while I was there were just mounds and piles of bikes. Now, OnTrack normally get bikes, and what they do is these bikes are ones that are reclaimed or donated, and then they go out into the community and into schools, etc. But because of the pandemic, what they were actually ending up with is just a whole load of bikes that they couldn't get rid of. And I was speaking to Adrian, and he was like, "Oh, look, my problem is I've got all these bikes and I'm struggling to get rid." And I then went, and I said to him, "Look, my problem is people are asking to buy bikes from me and I don't have bikes." And what we did was we came up with the agreement that I would take bikes from him, and we would actually arrange to do what's called a big bike giveaway. And we did 2 of these events in Girlington. If you just click onto the next slide for me, please. So what we did was kind of link everything together and solve the problem. So Adrian from OnTrack was able to offload, it was 280 bikes. We also got rid of some wheelchairs, some Zimmer frames, and some prams as well. So these went free out into the community, and it was just, absolutely fantastic, because it was that thing of recycling, getting people active. Parents were just going spare during, all the lockdown and wanting their kids to be active and doing something. And there is a definite love for cycling, but it's just people need that support. Just click onto the next slide, and you can see from here, we actually, there's girls and boys. It wasn't just a case of the parents saying, "Oh, we want bikes for boys." It was for everybody. Next slide, please. Okay, and just following before we go on to the next thing is we actually have 4 other big bike giveaways in the pipeline. So we have 2 that are going to take place in Keighley, and we also have one in Wibsey, and we're in the process of arranging one in Homewood as well. So it's not just working in areas with high BAME populations, it's areas with high poverty, and that goes across the district. Okay, now when we did the bike, no, just go back one, sorry. Okay, thanks, Sam. So what we did, City Connect had some funding available. It's the first time that we actually tapped into it. And we decided to do a project, contacted the local NHS and spoke to Mel Pickup, who's the chief exec for Bradford Teaching Hospitals Foundation Trust. And what we actually decided to do was almost kind of run the bikeability project with the hospital staff. So the hospital, if we go on to the next slide, please. The sessions that we delivered were, catered around their needs. So this picture on the left, I'm not a morning person, and I was having to get up at like 6 o'clock, set off on my bike and cycle across to the venue, because I thought if I turn up in my car, it's not really giving the right impression. So I was like, getting through, and sometimes, it was absolutely freezing. So that's me, wrapped up in about 10 layers to keep warm. But it was that thing of being flexible and working across, the hours that the staff need. So we had early hour sessions, we had midday sessions, and we had evening sessions as well. Next slide, please. In terms of the hospital as well, they were brilliant. So what they did was the providers, we were on 2 different sites. So we did the project, the first part was at Bradford Royal Infirmary, and they provided us with a container that we were able to leave our bikes safely in. And then when we finished at one site, they had a container at another venue, St. Luke's Hospital, and left our bikes there as well. The photograph there, that's Barry Arthur from Rose Cycling. So he actually joined us as well in terms of being able to deliver this project in, helping with Dr. Bike sessions, and actually helping out sometimes with the actual bike delivery as well. So it was a very, collaborative work with a number of people together with the common goal of getting more people on into cycling. Next slide, please. So the next couple of slides are just pictures of, this is Andrew, who's second from left. So Andrew's my cycling buddy. We normally go out cycling together, but also he's our other coach On a Bike. So officially there's 2 of us that are actually delivering sessions, but we are actually looking to develop that to kind of meet the demand. Next slide, please. Okay, this is just kind of a little bit of a summary of the mixed match of people that we had. Next one, please. Okay, just click once. So this here is just a little pie chart in terms of the sessions that we did in terms of the entry level people came through at. So with the BAME females that we actually had, majority of people that came with Learn to Ride sessions, hence LTR. There were some that were able to ride a bike, and then they were kind of going in at level 1, and there was just, I think 1 that came in for level 2, and nobody came in at level 3. So it was interesting to see that, majority of people from both populations, female, didn't know how to ride a bike. Next, just click one, please. Okay, and then this here is the equivalent in terms of white female cyclists, and most people that came in through there were actually coming in at level 1 as an entry. Interestingly, if you go on to the next slide, the sessions were not deliberately advertised. They weren't advertised as ladies only. It was actually cycling for everyone, all staff. So it wasn't a case of limiting or restricting to, whatever role you did in the hospital. It was a case of, if you worked for the NHS, you were able to access these cycling sessions, and they were free. It was a case of the men that came in, we had 2 that jumped straight into level 3. They're like, yeah, we know how to ride. And when we took them out for a ride, they were like, oh, we didn't realize this is how you actually approach a roundabout. So they actually came away with learning something. But, with the women, it's a case of, you can clearly see there the level that people are coming in, and maybe it's a confidence thing. Some people could ride and they still came to a Learn to Ride session because they weren't sure and didn't want to kind of feel embarrassed and go in a little bit higher if it came in at a lower level. Okay, next slide, please. This here is Sam. So she was actually one of the case studies used for City Connect. So Sam learned to ride a bike, and it was kind of, how it's a small world. Barry actually taught her how to ride a bike in August, and then she hadn't ridden since then, and then came onto this project. So we went through the level 1, level 2, Level 3, this here is what I call the Big Red Bridge that goes across Manchester Road. So we went across the bridge a couple of times, but also because she was doing a level 3 riding, is we were doing across all the lanes on that road, which is quite a busy road, and making sure she was comfortable turning left, going ahead, turning right, all the different kind of scenarios. So it was just a case of building up the skills so she can actually commute. Incidentally, Sam actually came, contacted me because we have a WhatsApp group for the NHS staff. And although she's got a chunky mountain bike, which you can see there, that's her own bike. She's actually borrowing my hybrid bike over the next 2-3 weeks because she wants to develop and see, get a little bit more road cycling. So there is still that relationship with the members of staff. So even though the project was funded up to a certain point, we're still doing things voluntary after that to make sure it's sustained. Next slide, please. So this here really is just kind of a quick summary and an overview of what we've done during the pandemic. So, we've done things like, the big bike giveaway, we've done the doctor bikes, we've done the NHS Get On Your Bicycle project as well, working with a number of partners. And it's a case of, it's been, I think if we actually kind of put numbers as to how many people we've impacted, it's probably, close to 1,000 people, because even given the bikes, we're doing the bikes, fixing them, working with staff, etc. So, there's a massive impact there, and there's still a demand. I've had messages today asking me for bikes. We're currently working on a project with Jump, which is Join Us Move Play. They're a local delivery pilot that's funded by Sport England. So we've actually refurbished bikes and given them out to 6 schools, had a conversation with the lead on there, and we've got at the moment 30 bikes in our dojo, which they've agreed and said we can just do up and give them out into the community. So as soon as that's kind of put out on WhatsApp, it'll just go crazy and we'll hand them out again. And final slide, please. This was me cycling in Orkney and Shetlands in 2019, so I'm hanging in there, wanting to get out on my bike and do some touring when it's safe to do so. Thank you.
Mumtaz, thank you. That was excellent and truly inspirational. Thank you very much for that. I'm now going to hand over to Councillor Groves, who's going to talk about how this ties back to the broader connectivity strategy. Councillor Groves.
Thank you, Ben. I think I just want to make a couple of comments before we go to the connectivity strategy. Thank you to everyone for the presentation. Absolutely brilliant in terms of the experts that have engaged with us tonight. And thank you to everybody who's joined us on this session, all 78 of you. Just been watching all the comments and the chat, and absolutely fantastic, because we do want you to be part of this strategy at WICO. WICO, we want people to lead the connectivity strategy so that we can deliver the right outcomes for you. There's been some great challenges in the Q&A, and I've really liked the engagement of people, volunteering to set up groups. Absolutely brilliant. Just onto our experts, Jenny on Living Streets. I think you've set out for us as all politicians that actually, when we're in all the planning sessions that we attend, that your vision, the Living Streets vision, must be at the forefront of everything. And I live in an area where there's a 20 is plenty. And the Leeds Play Streets and traffic-free neighbourhoods, that is the way forward. So thank you for that. Katrina, in terms of the Cyclops junctions and the work that you've done, absolutely brilliant. The disused railways, I think it's really interesting. And one of the big things that I think we should look at is the Section 106 money. I don't think enough money is dedicated to cycling and walking through Section 106. The planning orientated round developments, absolutely brilliant. And the placemaking and inclusive growth that can bring. I think you really articulated that well around the deprived neighbourhoods. So brilliant. And also women have been saying to me, actually they want these traffic free routes. There's not enough women cycling, and that has been brought up on many occasions to myself. And Mumtaz, what an amazing ambassador you are. Absolutely brilliant. What an authentic story, and what a journey you've come on. That was absolutely fantastic. yeah, you know, we do need to capture everything that you've done and get that out there, because absolutely brilliant. I love the family ethos, and you know, yeah, so absolutely brilliant. And you did remind me in terms of when you said about wheelchairs, people with disabilities and cycling things. So thank you all so much for what you've presented tonight. I thought it was absolutely excellent. So our connectivity strategy, obviously we've got a strong ambition in West Yorkshire that all the modes will link together. We've got an amazing team who are so dedicated and hardworking to making sure that cycling and walking are no longer the Cinderellas of transport. We've already made a good start. We've got the connectivity strategy out there, and I would urge all 78 participants to visit the website and please feed into that, because that's what we need. We would love to work with you beyond this session. And I think what we have done, we've got a blank canvas, we're making all the modes work together, but we're already creating those spaces. We were lucky enough to get 317 million through Transforming Cities. So we're starting to develop those traffic-free areas around stations and bus gateways that are easy to navigate for people. But we've got so much more that we need to do. And the ambition is there. Or if you looked at our Transforming Cities page, there's going to be a 700 cycle park in Leeds. There's an ambition around the Queensbury Tunnel for it to be the longest. And these are just a few of the schemes. But we have got a massive challenge. And I think when I was looking at the chat and the questions, there was quite a lot of things that came up there that really sort of resonated. The zero carbon challenge is huge, and we simply have to get people out of cars. And I think it was Ian from Hunslet who was pointing out the gaps, and it's quite right that we've still got to really pull this all together in our strategy. And I think it will come, but it's got to be a big sea change on the ground politically through policy. There's got to be funding and more funding. I know the government are already supporting this agenda, but there needs to be more and more funding for this. We will probably see the reallocation of road space to bus, to walking, to cycling, and people to make it easier for people with mobility issues as well. But this has been one of the most challenging times in all our lives, probably on this call, with COVID-19. And I think the one thing that has come out of it is the lifestyle change and people wanting to walk and cycle. And I think we need to harness that, and we need to work together to actually make it a reality that we can actually deliver those schemes that will make it easier for people. People simply we have to reduce the amount of journeys by private car. So we are trying at West Yorkshire to deliver a public transport system that is the first choice for everyone. And cycling and walking has got to link to bus, it's got to link to rail, it's got to link to tram, but it's much more than just a connectivity strategy on a map. I think again through the Q&A, people were challenging about, you know, can you get your bike on the railway, or on the trains? So we've got all that to cover. So I just wanted to know that we're ambitious for this. We really appreciate you joining us tonight at this session, and thank you so much for the Q&A in the chat that you've put there so far. So I'm going to hand back to Ben so we can go to the panel.
Thank you very much, Councillor Groves. We're going to go back to the screen view now so you can see the panelists. We've had loads of questions in, so many thanks for all of those that have submitted questions, and we've got about 15 minutes, just under 15 minutes to fire some questions at panel members. So if I may, I'll take kind of chair's prerogative and fire off questions directly to panel members and ask for a quick response so we can get through as many topics as possible. And if I can, I'll start, if I may, with Katrina, and a couple of questions that have come in around the effectiveness of emergency cycle measures, and whether you feel that there was a bit of a knee-jerk reaction that was too quick to be critical of them. So welcome your views on that one, please.
Yeah, thanks, Ben. Yes, there was definitely examples of emergency measures that weren't very well thought through. I think the ones that worked best were where councils already had a plan in place and they were able to kind of accelerate those plans, or where they kind of took existing kind of cycling infrastructure and improved it. So where they had existing kind of advisory cycle lanes and were able to kind of widen those and protect them. I think that worked quite well, but I think it was an incredibly steep learning curve, and I think it's been useful. And I think at least local authorities are now much more willing to try things and trial things. So hopefully we'll at least get a kind of silver lining of a legacy of that kind of more willingness to kind of experiment going forward.
Thanks very much. Really interesting response, and a key issue. I wondered if I might now turn to Katie to pick up the question around why this infrastructure takes so long, and a couple of questions that have come in saying, well, why is it taking so long, and what are we doing now to improve take up of walking and cycling?
Okay, so infrastructure takes long, partly based on the answer that Kat's has given. We don't want to just put infrastructure in without engaging with people in the first place, especially when it's could be a scheme that isn't wanted. So we have to factor in lots of different reasons, lots of different sort of parts to delivering a scheme. However, we are delivering as well. So one of our main infrastructure programs that is currently live and has started to deliver is our Transforming Cities Fund program, and those schemes are all focused on improving access to sustainable and active travel, and that is a £500 million fund that will be delivered across West Yorkshire and North Yorkshire over the next 2 years. So we have to have delivered most of it by 2023. So that's quite quick for infrastructure delivery and for big schemes, and to factor in all that consultation and engagement. And also there's a lot going on with our partners as well. So Connecting Leeds are delivering a massive amount of infrastructure around Leeds. We do know that we can do more, and I wish it could be quicker, but there's a lot that we need to factor in. And I guess we've learned a lot of lessons as well around design and how we can implement better design. So that'll make a big difference as well in the effects that people see on the ground.
Thanks, Katie. Mumtaz, I wonder if I might turn to you. There's been a couple of questions in the chat and comments about the different kinds of cycle infrastructure that are put in, be it segregated or completely traffic free, or kind of mixed with traffic. From your perspective, in someone that's helping people learn to cycle and gain confidence on a bike, does it matter to you, kind of the where and the how?
I mean, for me personally, it's a case of I'll ride wherever, and I've gone on A roads, and it does, it's a case of just holding your nerve and cycling. I think from when I've taken, like, for example, when I took Sam out for a ride, the lady who's with the Big Red Bridge, we actually used some of the infrastructure that was there, that was cordoned off from the main traffic, and she was a lot more comfortable and more relaxed using those than when using cycle lanes where traffic could actually veer into. So, if we're kind of looking at encouraging more people to cycle, then there's got to be that infrastructure and that commitment to doing that. More people will cycle if they feel safe that they can do. And it's more that entry level, or those people that don't feel as confident on going on the road. One of the kind of things that I've always said in the past is a possible solution is having bus lanes, but actually having them operational all the time, but cyclists obviously can use them, so it's not just rush hour traffic. Because I know when I'm cycling and I know if there's a bus lane, you just feel like, oh, you've got a lot more space, and obviously they're nice and wide as well. So sometimes there's cycling lanes put in for cyclists, and I think I saw something on Twitter, and there was one that was 43 centimeters wide, and it's like, well, that's just not wide enough, and especially if you've got panniers, you've got no chance. And and sometimes you have two cyclists cycling along. So if you're going to put the infrastructure in, then it's got to be proper. You can't just cut corners or cut costs.
Thank you. And can I turn to Jenny to pick up the same theme about interactions between different modes from a kind of pedestrian perspective? Two questions that have come in, Jenny. One about kind of where are we on parking with pavements? I know you referred to it, but what's the latest? And then another one about kind of nuisance motorbikes, and I wondered if you might extend that to kind of interactions between pedestrians and things like e-scooters. How do Living Streets advise both pedestrians and other road users in terms of the right balance?
Yeah, okay. So I guess the headline is that we want to have separate space for people walking and people using other modes. I think part of the challenge is obviously there is a limit to how much space there is on the street, and historically the priority has been make sure we've got plenty of space for cars, and then whatever's left we'll squeeze in everything else, and sometimes that means walkers mixing with people cycling. So yeah, in an ideal world, if there's space on the street, we have footway for people walking, we have a cycle lane that's well protected for people cycling, and then if required we have the rest of the street for cars. And if there isn't space for all of that, then it's thinking, is this actually a street that maybe cars shouldn't be on, or is this a street that maybe pedestrians shouldn't be on, like motorway, for example. So pavement parking wise, yeah, again, it kind of comes back to the footway. The pavement is for people walking, not for cars to park on. And we've kind of got into this societal sort of situation where people just think that they can. So in London, obviously pavement parking is banned, and the government consulted last year on having that same situation across England. It's a really confusing law at the moment around pavement parking. I think officially you are allowed to park on the pavement, but you're not allowed to drive up onto it. So legally it's all very complicated and confusing. We just want it to be really clear. And so hopefully we'll see the government following up on that consultation fairly soon. I know they got a lot more responses than they expected, a lot from Living Streets campaigners. So yeah, we'll see what comes from that. But in the meantime, we continue to campaign and support authorities that want to use the powers that they already have to tackle pavement parking. And with regards to e-scooters and motorbikes and things, I guess on the e-scooter front, because that's really sort of timely at the moment with the trials that are going on. Again, you know, we don't want to be anti things that are getting people out of cars, but at the same time, we do have real concerns around the safety of e-scooters on our streets as they are at the moment. You know, we're already struggling to find enough space for people walking and people on people cycling, and so if we have people on scooters as well that have slightly different needs and requirements, where do they fit in the mix? They're very quiet, so if people are walking and there's someone on an e-scooter on the pavement, then that can be quite frightening sometimes if they're creeping up behind you at quite a high speed. And also there's the question around where those scooters are actually stored. If you've got a scooter share scheme, again, making sure they're not taking space away from people walking. So yeah, it's not a straightforward one.
Thanks very much, Jenny. Really helpful comments. Can I turn to Kit? And a question's come in, Kit, about the strategy that we're consulting on at the moment only seems to cover a fraction of West Yorkshire. So what are we doing about everywhere else?
Absolutely, it's a question, isn't it? So what we've got is that last summer we piloted the methodology that the DFT laid out for local cycling and local cycling and walking implementation plans, and how that was going to work in the West Yorkshire context. We went to each district and we got a sample cycle route and a sample walking zone to see how we do the engagement, how it would work, you know, just to sort of really get our heads around the entire idea. That has now been published as part of this connectivity plan, but as you astutely point out, it's very small. One walking route and one cycling route in each district does not a network make. Now, the connectivity plan lays out a very clear network across West Yorkshire for all the modes. As Councillor Groves and Ben said, we're looking at really sort of trying to make an integrated transport system that works together to be an alternative to the car. That has a large number of cycling routes and walking zones identified in it at a very high level. What we're now doing is we're currently engaged with all the districts and our partners to develop the next phase of cycling and walking schemes. So we're identifying the key corridors that we need to do based on demand, based on deprivation, based on deliverability, and a whole range of different criteria. What this means is that by the end of this summer, we should have at least 10 routes for each district around that number that we can look at from a cycling point of view, and look at how they would integrate into their surrounding environment in terms of feeder routes or potentially filter permeability in low traffic neighborhoods, looking at walking zones, and then we'll grow from there and there. Unfortunately, as Katie says, and as others have pointed out, we're trying to change 70 years of car dominance very quickly. We're turning a tank around and we need to go from 0 to 100 as fast as we can, but we haven't necessarily had the capacity until recently, not the political will until recently, to make a lot of these changes. Now, however, we're developing our capacity and we're developing that pipeline of schemes so that over the coming years we can rapidly iterate and grow out from these these corridors and these walking zones to cover the entire of West Yorkshire. One of the things that we will be using to determine where we should work next, on top of the stuff that the data we can use, is really the stuff we get through the engagement plan from the connectivity strategy or the Safer Streets consultation we ran last summer, to make sure that we're delivering infrastructure where it's required and where it's wanted and where it will make a big difference to people's lives.
Okay, brilliant. Thank you very much. Okay, we're almost out of time. I'm going to, if I may, pass one last question to Councillor Groves, which I'm hoping that she can give her views on, and then we can use that as a point to close. Just let me say before I finish, we have many other questions that we're not going to have time to get to this evening, particularly things around funding and working in partnership, and these are core issues for the whole of the connectivity strategy. But Councillor Groves, one of the first questions we had in was about whether we need a West Yorkshire active travel champion. What are your views on that, please?
I certainly think, that Chris Boardman has had a seat in Westminster, so being able to, engage with the government, and I think that's really crucial for funding going forward. But actually, we need lots of ambassadors because we've got to reach everyone in terms of cycling. So while professional cyclists are great and can hold some conversations, it's about having many ambassadors and hopefully, if we get the funding, I think the government are going to set out their zero carbon roadmap. I'm hoping that we come away from the short-term funding and that there's long-term funding and revenue for maintenance and green corridors. And I think that's about everybody feeding in across West Yorkshire tonight. It's been absolutely brilliant. I've really enjoyed, looking at what the panelists have said, listening to what the panelists have said, but what the participants have brought to the table. And it's not just about one person. I think it's about a collective will and desire to deliver in West Yorkshire on cycling and walking.
Excellent, thank you very much. I think that is a fitting comment on which to draw proceedings to a close for this evening. Can I thank the panelists, particularly the experts that have given up their time this evening, to Councillor Groves to contribute. It's been really insightful and really, really helpful. Can I also thank everyone that's put questions in. I'm going to let Katie come in because you're messaging me saying mention the survey and the map. So will you just like to see what you mean there?
I just don't want us to forget the thing that we really need from the people on this call, which is to go to Your Voice. So I put the link in the chat to take part in the survey that's linked around the connectivity plan, but also there's an interactive map. So all of the comments that you're making around sort of the locations you want to see improvements for walking and cycling, drop those comments onto that map. And then we have them and they will form part of the engagement that we're doing and the future plans for cycling and walking. So make your voice heard around cycling and around walking using those means. Links in the chat.
Thanks very much, Katie. You said that far more eloquently than I could. Brilliant. Thank you, everybody. Thank you to all of us who have taken part. Please do, as Katie says, feed your views in, and we'll take on board all the comments that have been made this evening. It's been a really productive and helpful session. And with that, I'll close the session. Thank you all very much.
Thank you. Bye,
Thank
everyone.
you.
Bye.
Good evening, everybody.